And I have said, basically, that I think that the concept as described by a Russian is going backwards, that it really is an issue in terms of kind of a 19th and maybe even a 20th century concept, but doesn't really belong in the 21st century. We have a lot of international issues, just the 5 that I talked about earlier and others, which require what is known as kind of a trans-border, transnational approach. And countries should not be, Russia specifically, should not be afraid of independent democratic countries on its borders. They are not a threat to them. But that does lead to the question of what are the Russians doing in our sphere if we say that they aren't important. I think that the Monroe Doctrine is obviously that we don't want to see interference by foreign powers in our hemisphere. And I do think that there is a natural friendship and linkages of the countries in this hemisphere. But this is my personal answer. I don't think we should be afraid of what is going on. We don't want to see a Cuban Missile Crisis or anything like that. And Hugo Chavez is a difficult customer, but I don't think we should fear that we will see a Russian intrusion into our hemisphere if the next president actually pays some attention to Latin America and to pursuing a democratic free market agenda there. I think it's very important for democracies in Latin America to deliver so that you don't get somebody like Hugo Chavez, who is someone that is operating off of the fear of poor people that they're not getting anything. I went to Venezuela a number of times. It was a place that was run by a bunch of tired old men that had no connection to the people, so I can understand how Hugo Chavez got elected. But he is an example of somebody taking advantage of a democratic election to become an autocrat, as I pointed out. And I think we need to be supportive of the other governments so that we have a natural friendship with the countries in Latin America. And so we don't get into this kind of feeling, this is my part of the world and that's your part of the world, because we have to operate throughout the whole world. I want to see American influence in democratic countries throughout the world. And I think that while Hugo Chavez is a complication, we should not give him this much credit for making our lives so complicated. But the sphere of interest, it's a very interesting political science question, and that's a hard one. But I think we have to operate in some way while respecting the Monroe Doctrine, respecting, in fact, that we have this natural relationship with the Americas, that we should not let the Russians get away with saying that everybody in their neighborhood is in their sphere of interest. By the way, on Latin America, I have to say the most revolutionary thing that I did while I was in the State Department was to move Canada into the Western Hemisphere. In case you didn't know, it was actually in Europe, according to the State Department. And so I figured it should be moved into the Western Hemisphere where it really is, in order to strengthen this concept of the democracies of the Americas. Because by having another strong democracy like Canada with us as we looked at the Americas, we were able to develop and I think enlarge on this concept of democracies helping each other.
Secretary Albright, you referred to the need to foster democracies rather than to impose them around the world. In my political science studies at Cleveland State University, it's been suggested that certain conditions need to exist in order for a democracy to take hold. Didn't the United States and its allies destabilizing actions in Iraq through the sanctions and the years of intervening war help to destroy the conditions for a possible democracy in Iraq? Isn't, in some cases, the presence of an awful despot as a dictator necessary where democracy cannot be achieved at this time?
No. I have to tell you, I don't think there's any condition in any country that justifies the existence of an awful despot and dictator for answer. But let me go back on something larger. I actually worked for a president who read a lot. He assigned us all books. So the book he assigned to me was a book called The Peace to End All Peace by David Fromkin, who, it's the history of the creation of the modern Middle East. And the short version is, this was after the end of World War I and the end of the Ottoman Empire. The short version is, the modern Middle East came into being because the British and French bureaucracies were lying to each other. And Iraq is an artificial country, and created out of a variety of different groupings, and actually that had very little, had a difficult history, had a royal family, then moved into a different secular regime. So I do not think that the U.S., we aren't responsible for everything that happened there. Saddam Hussein invaded a bordering country, and I think the steps that were taken after the Gulf War with the sanctions were, in fact, justified. So that's specifically on that issue. But on democracy in general, I actually believe that we are all the same throughout the world, and that everybody wants to be able to make decisions about his or her own lives, and that people want to first decide where they're going to live and where they're going to send their kids to school and what jobs they have, and ultimately it kind of moves up the chain in order to make decisions about their local government and then their major government. And therefore, I believe that there is no one that is not ready for democracy. There are different phases of it, and people want to be able to run their lives. The question is, how does it come into existence, and whether it is at all appropriate for outsiders to give any help to it at all. You'll be really sorry you asked this. I am chairman of the board of the National Democratic Institute, which is an organization that was begun under the auspices of Ronald Reagan, who had thought that democracies did not explain themselves well enough vis-a-vis communism. And he spoke in London in 1983 and basically said, we need to explain the theory of democracy better. So he created something called the Endowment for Democracy, and it has under it 4 institutes: Democrats and Republicans, business and labor, kind of the warp and woof of a democratic society. And so we were trying to figure out what it is what our mandate was. And we thought it was to go and support democracies and democratic movements in other countries. But then we had to think about what democracy was really about. What is it? So somebody said elections, and somebody else said not really, because you can have elections, they were having them in communist countries, and over 90% would vote for the leader, and so he thought he was legitimate. It actually is the rule of law and the existence of an opposition party that allows for accountability and change. And so it's one thing to go into countries and support democracy. It's another, as I said, to impose democracy. And I would not damn the Iraqi people to saying that they need to have a dictator. I certainly don't damn the North Korean people. I don't damn the Venezuelan people. And so I don't think that it is right to say that some countries are only ready for dictators. I don't think we're all in the same phase of democracy. And I also believe that you actually have to have a middle class to have a democracy. So one of the arguments that we political scientists have is, what comes first, economic development or political development? And my answer is they have to go together. And it goes a little bit to the Latin American question. People want to vote and eat. And so democracy has to deliver. And so there has to be this combination of an evolution. Sometimes the wrong people get elected. It does happen even in an advanced democracy. And the bottom line is that you have to have the next election and you have to have the opposition party. So it's more complicated. But I definitely disagree with your final point, is that some places are only ready for dictators.